We'll start now. So, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining tonight. I'm Kelvin, and I'm the treasurer of AIAS Pratt chapter, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's lecture. This is the 8th lecture of the AIAS Pratt lecture series, coordinated by our president, Jerry Kim. You can watch our recorded lectures on our YouTube channel that we did in the past, and this lecture will also be recorded and uploaded in 1 to 2 weeks. I'm very happy and honored to introduce Lara and Fredrik to this lecture. They have been extremely supportive to us in reaching the goals of our chapter, which is to build a sustainable platform and culture for architecture students inside and outside of Pratt. I also want to thank all of our chapter's board members who have been very hardworking, innovative, and fun to work with. They're also here with us today. So I'm pleased to welcome our lecturers, Lara and Fredrik, for tonight's lecture. And I bet most of you know them already, but would you two mind introducing yourself and also about introducing Spacepopular a little bit before you start? Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin, and thank Gary for inviting us. Great to be here. Thanks everyone for joining on a Friday night. We have a little bit of an introduction to us and the practice in the lecture itself. So I think we might just go ahead and...
we can do that personal intro before. I'm Lara, this is Fredrik, and we are currently in Spain. We are now spending quite a lot of our time here, but our practice and all of our work is based in different places. We move around a lot between Spain, London, also the US, and so on. And as we will show, also our work is happening in all sorts of places. So we are not a local practice per se. And yeah, perhaps we...
And we will show you a kind of overview over the things that we're interested in and the things that we've been working on over the last 10 years or so. And they'll probably take about 40 minutes maximum. And might be good if you, not sure if you usually do this, but if you have things you want to ask or anything along the way, you can pop that into the chat so we can have a look as we're going along. And then I'm sure if anyone has anything they want to ask afterwards, I think we definitely have time for that afterwards also. So we can all see this, right? So this is us. We're called Spacepopular, and we founded Spacepopular, our practice, in Bangkok in 2013, where we were living and working for 5 years, where we were also teaching at INDA, which is part of Chulalongkorn University. We were teaching there for 5 years, and we were also year coordinators while we were there. And
we actually started teaching right away, right after we graduated, which came as quite a bit of a shock, but I thought it might be interesting for some of you to know how we started. So we started teaching, and then while we were there, we started our practice.
And since then, after that, we were teaching for 5 years at the AA in London. And currently we've been teaching at Daniels in Toronto for the past 2 years. And right now we're teaching for part of the year at UCLA in Los Angeles and at IE in Segovia outside Madrid. So a little bit of an overview of the kind of work that we do. Some of this stuff we won't go too much in detail with, but we are architects, and we have done houses such as this, the house in Valencia for a private developer. We're quite interested in construction technologies, often spending quite a lot of time thinking about how specific construction systems feed into the whole logic of how architecture is created. So in this case, with brick vaults.
And also on how to work with techniques that are existent on site. In our experience, you get the best results if you do things that people know how to do very well in a certain place, and then you can change them a little bit, or you can introduce something new. But if everything is new, you're probably going to have a very hard time and actually not learn much from the knowledge that there might be in the specific place where you're working.
We've also worked on developing ideas for construction systems, often again working with the idea of part of a process being extremely systematic and other parts being up to the homeowner, such as in this case. We've also done quite a lot of interiors, most of them in Asia. 2 of these are in Bangkok, and we also see a Montessori school in Valencia. And with most of these interiors and with other projects, we've also had the chance to design a lot of furniture. So we've done everything from lounge chairs to entire kind of reception desks and all sorts of different kinds of furniture. And we also have done and continue to do quite a lot of kind of artworks that are often very graphic, very colorful, that often go into our exhibitions in the form of, often in the form of textiles or carpets, etc. And being architects, of course, we've also done a lot of competitions. Often it's said that when you do your 10th competition, that's the one you win. And I think we have done 11 or 12 and we still haven't won anything. So
we're stopped counting now. It just has changed that in the beginning they were unpaid competitions and now they are paid competitions only. Yeah. So that's the step up. But just to encourage everyone out there, that's how it goes. For us, I mean, I know there has been interesting discussion lately about this and about the problems with unpaid work, which we definitely support, and we think that it's great to see new initiatives as well. But to find a way, a sustainable way, a financially sustainable way to get work out there, to get yourself to do projects is something that we would recommend. Ideally, it would have been work that was compensated, but this was a very important part of our practice to get to do all of these projects in the early years.
But perhaps what we are maybe most well known for and what we've spent a lot of time on in the past, let's say 6 or 7 years, is projects often in the form of exhibitions or cultural projects that are often more sort of theoretical or speculative projects on the relationship between architecture and space and media, and specifically immersive media, such as VR and related technologies. And this is what we'll focus talking about in the lecture here today. And the first project we ever did in this realm was the Cloud Resilience in 2013, which was a proposal for a global mortality rate database that was accessible through a browser. So essentially it was like, you would call it today a metaverse. At that time, that science fiction term was not used for this. We, by the way, still don't use this term. But it just goes to say kind of, we've been thinking about these thoughts about virtual togetherness and about kind of spatial media for quite a long time. This is also the first time we ever designed an avatar. This was the way that you were visible in this space if you were attending a funeral or something like that. And here is a sort of, you can tell how long ago this was, judging from the layout or the design of the browser. They don't look exactly like this anymore. And we started working with VR headsets and related technologies like this in 2015, I think, 14, with students in Thailand, experimenting often with the role and the kind of inclusion of the body in the experience of spatial media, and often in kind of very intense workshops, etc., where students were working with very experimental practices. And basically since then, we started this, the first solo exhibition we had, 2017 in London, the Glass Chain, which is an exhibition looking at the now 100-year kind of anniversary of German Expressionism and their view and their idea of glass in architecture. And this is the first time we created one of these sort of mixed, we could call it, let's say, like a mixed reality experience, where you can see Lara here wearing a headset and touching this glass sculpture, involving the body in the discovery of what then the eyes are seeing, which is quite different from what the space of the body and what the body is touching. We also done other, some of these we'll talk a bit more about, but we just mentioned a few others, exhibitions that often features large scale installations, sculptures that also form as a kind of stage for an immersive film. You can see the headset over there. This is an exhibition in the Royal Palace of Milan, where we are investigating the role of virtual surfaces. And in the experience, this is what it's sort of different kinds of views that you get in the VR headset compared to what you see in the physical space. And in this project and in many other projects, we are very interested in the role of and the power of surfaces, like the historical overview, in this case, looking at a French 17th century tapestry and the power of changing colors and tones in things like textiles in order to contain a lot of information. We often say that like this was like a tapestry back in this time was almost like a USB stick. It was an extremely efficient way to transport a big piece of information in one single object that could be rolled up and put on a horse carriage and transported somewhere, which was a extremely novel kind of thing back then. And we've explored this notion of the sort of the power of surfaces specifically in textiles in a lot of other exhibitions. We'll speak a little bit more about this exhibition, which opened in 2018 at ArkDes in Stockholm, which is housed in one of their largest gallery spaces. And you can see here these big kind of fabric murals, these textiles. This was during one of the several kind of public events that we were holding there. And this exhibition specifically was about, not specifically about virtual surfaces. The main thing that it was investigating was the future role of immersive media such as AR, augmented reality, in the city, so in public space, and how public spaces, in this case looking at Stockholm, how public spaces might be changing over the next 30 to 40 years as more and more people starts to wear AR devices out in the city. So cities in the age of spatial computing or in spatial media. And quite often in these, and when we do exhibitions like this, we treat the exhibition gallery like a diagram. This is a plan view where you can see that there are these big panels, and we created a kind of scenario where we have 6 different environments that are maybe typical to Stockholm in this case, and then created a large diagrammatic carpet where the center of the carpet is like 100% virtuality, and then it goes sort of outwards and becomes more physical from there. And here we see us being silly in the gallery space before we put it in, but just for scale, the carpet then basically fills the entire room from wall to wall. And this is also the first time we tried to articulate some of our ideas and some of our thoughts about the possibilities of virtual architecture and these 10 propositions. And we'll just take you through like 2 of them as an idea of kind of how we think and things that we think are interesting or important. So the first one here, virtual content will radically alter the value of architecture, is something that we definitely believe. And in order to experiment and to kind of create a thought experiment about that specific proposition, we chose to work out one of these fabric murals using this room, which is the Gilded Hall at the City Hall in Stockholm, which is a room completely covered in gold, which has these mosaic motifs that are kind of celebrating the history of the country. It's very nationalistic, the kind of gods and kings and spiritual creatures, etc. And then we created these murals, which is kind of taking motifs from this room. So you can see this doorway here, you can see it here in the corner. And we were imagining that if you walk around in a room like this and you're wearing AR glasses, then these motifs could be more fluid. They don't need to be about sort of carved into gold mosaic, literally, and celebrating national pride, etc. But they could be more fluent and they could change person to person. You see here like a Wi-Fi signal, the logotype of Wikipedia. We can see a character from Minecraft, etc. And a close-up view here. An example also where the kind of way we like to work with creating these kind of very rich motifs that tell several stories. Another proposition, spatial experiences will become increasingly specific and tailored to its dwellers. So that's also what we were kind of mentioning in the previous example. We created these mural also imagining what might happen to the home if what we see is constantly mediated by this media we wear over our eyes, imagining that the router will spill out this golden cloud of emojis, or that a coffee shop might show the value of cryptocurrencies in the bulging of the white typical tiles in a typical hipster co-working cafe. And another really interesting example that we worked with is this beautiful mural in one of the metro stations in Stockholm, done by a feminist artist, Siri Derkert, which materially it's not very valuable. It's just sandblasted concrete, but it's extremely valuable in its messages. Here we can see Siri Derkert sandblasting the pattern into the wall. And we were then imagining that things are no longer carved into stone, as it were. If the city is augmented, then these messages and kind of political engagement in the city can change and be different from person to person, which might create a lot of really exciting possibilities, but a lot of also large challenges. And with this project, with this exhibition, we were also really realizing that we need to ask ourselves this question and see if we can get somewhere with what is the value of virtual architecture. And in order to do that, we realized that we might need to understand first, sort of from our point of view, what is the value of physical architecture? So we know these very basic things like where a building is, how big it is, how much energy is required to construct it and to maintain it, etc. And this is quite straightforward, but we realized that it's only really this bottom half that translates into virtual architecture. And a lot of them, the more kind of fluid and transient qualities like aesthetics and meaning, etc. But of course also labor and energy. And also in this exhibition, we also had a headset which allowed people to join a Metaverse platform or a social VR platform, as people were referring to them at the time, where you could occupy an avatar and interact with other people that were joining online. And in other exhibitions, we usually work with VR headset to create these immersive films. And another exhibition where we were interested in similar ideas, but mainly focusing on the home, is this project called the Ven Room, which is about virtual togetherness in the home in the age of spatial media. So like, how is the home changing if in the same scenario, people are wearing something like AR glasses all the time, basically. And we started to imagine and realize that if your entire home is mapped and other people's homes, as you spend time with people virtually, their home will be overlaid over yours, creating what we then decided to call Ven Rooms, coming from the term Venn diagram, where you have two areas or two volumes that are overlapping, creating a new kind of scenario. So in this exhibition, we've developed this idea of the Ven Room, which we recently also continued working with here for an immersive film in Milan, which opened just earlier this summer, which is a large 16 projector immersive film, which kind of further exploring this idea of living in what we could call, and what we're calling, a global home, like that your home through technology like this becomes a much more public space, similar to what we've all experienced for the past 2.5 years, you looking at bits of our home here behind us. And creating here where we can see this sort of idea of like that everyone's floor plans of their homes are actually connected in an interlocking web across the world, where your details of your home clashes with others, might create these sort of overlaps that we might begin to decorate, but also a lot of scenarios that are accidental, but that might have a lot of beauty and a lot of kind of strange, interesting qualities. And we sort of speculate that we will really start to value these qualities more and more as we in the next 30 to 40 years starts to live like this more and more. And we've been very, very interested generally in the role of media, not only in the home. In this case, we're looking at examples of media that belonged in the home, such as the television or the first personal computer. And this has really been something that we've explored more deeply since these projects, and maybe most specifically in this project called Freestyle Architectural Adventures in Mass Media, which is an exhibition that opened at the Royal Institute of British Architects in London, curated by Shumi Bose, where we got given, as a kind of starting point of this brief, this incredible book by Sebastiano Serlio, which was published in the 16th century in Italy, which was not the very first book on architecture. Alberti had already published his books, but his first book that contained illustrations and that was written in a language that most people could understand, in this case, Italian instead of Latin. So it's really the first book on architecture with illustrations, but really is significant because it's the first time that ideas about architecture could travel from one place to another. We often like to refer to the writing of Mario Carpo, who wrote a book about architecture in the age of printing, and articulating that before mass media, buildings could not travel, so people had to. Like, you couldn't photograph a building, most people couldn't draw or sketch. Perspective, by and large, hadn't been invented yet. So really, if you wanted to experience a building, you had to go and see it in person. So in that sense, the book became a vehicle for buildings to travel in for the first time ever. So this exhibition explored the relationship between innovations in media and style in British architecture from the 16th to the 21st century. An extremely ambitious project that was more than anything else a research project. And we give you a quick overview over how we do research. So in order to come to some conclusion, we needed to understand a lot about mass media hardware, so like actually the machines that makes media possible, and then mass media software, so like the actual books, the actual photographs, etc. Architectural styles and architects, like who they were, when they were working, who did they know, what libraries did they have, and of course, which buildings did they create. It's just a quick overview over the sort of complexity of this sort of research when you need to compare a lot of data, where you can see, started to see like, okay, who owned big libraries, who was alive at the same time, who inherited those libraries, and therefore which ideas could be translated forward. The exhibition itself is housed in the main gallery at the Reba in London and featured this large physical model and a digitally printed carpet surrounded by, on the walls, by collection objects, and then also a series of VR headsets that showed an immersive film. And here we see a kind of larger overview over the space. We can see some of the collection objects around also. And if you look at this from above, we can see again that in this exhibition, like the previous one we showed, the carpet serves as a kind of diagram that links everything in the entire gallery space. And it's a diagram that explains time diagonally like this. So all the way on the left, we can see there from 16th century and onwards, all the way up to our time and into the future. It's also split then in different styles. So we can see here the largest areas towards the left here, like Renaissance, Baroque, etc. And then in the carpet itself, we can also see the sort of ornamental details of the kind of mass media that was used currently at that time in location on the carpet. So if you're standing in this exhibition, if you're standing in front of this model like this, you can see a headset there on the right. It would look something like this in the immersive film. So in the immersive film, the model is always there, but the environment around it changes. So the room was split in 4 acts, covering the full length of this history, with the first one covering really the beginning when the book started arriving in England. We can see here this little virtual guide showing you Sebastiano Serlio's book. And then it takes you through very famous examples, such as Sir Christopher Wren, who built over 50 churches in central London. And he was really one of the first architects that was really a mass media architect, because he never left, he only left the UK once. All of his inspiration came from books that he purchased from France. So he's really like, doesn't look like it, but this architecture is completely mass media inspired, just like we are today. Act 2 covers a time when more and more books start to get translated and people start to really build up libraries, like little mini internets in their houses and in their workspaces. And also when the camera gets invented and the early sort of stereoscope, these first sort of VR-like devices. Act 3 covered the 20th century when the television and cinema, etc., gets introduced, and also where we start to see spaces within the media, like the television studios, etc., that start to really influence the style that people built both in their homes and in public spaces. And then, of course, rapidly speeding up to the first introduction of interactive media, such as video games in the home. And then Act 4 very humbly speculates on the future, where we looked at some of the most important steps in media in spreading ideas such as Pinterest. I'm sure that you all use. We would just like to say here very briefly that if anyone gives you shit for using Pinterest, they do not know what they're talking about. Things like Pinterest is some of the most powerful tool that's been invented in recent history. I encourage you to use it ferociously and with joy, as we do. And then, of course, the moments when really things start to pop out of the media and become spatial and spatial media, and we end up in this sort of environment where the media is all around us. This exhibition opened in February of 2020. We all know what happened in February of 2020.
Yeah, so at that point, the quote that we were bringing up before of buildings could not travel, so people had to was sort of inverted. And then we had a situation where people could not travel, so buildings had to. And then we all know, we started to see situations like this, which is not, well, yeah, it's partially the result of the pandemic, but also something that was going on already before. But here where we see someone in the university library, this is actually at UCLA, taking a class on Zoom in that very university, right? So we have this sort of in-between stage of things. This is also an image that we carry very, very much. We were giving a talk that was being broadcast on Twitter just a year ago, and people wanted to ask a question, and so they had to smack the phone into the microphone so that the people in the room in which we physically were could also hear that that question, because they were using Twitter rooms that only works for phone, and so on and so forth, right? So we started realizing that the transition into virtual space is not going to be a hard cut one, but actually would be something that will happen probably quite progressively. And it's not going to be a before and after, but we will probably carry a lot of the routines, a lot of the means to communicate that we have developed until today. We will carry them with us. And this takes us to the work that we have been doing in virtual space that is accessed through a screen, or is accessed through a variety of hardware, be it a screen or be it a headset. It's accessible through a variety of means. So we started experimenting with browser-based virtual spaces when we faced the challenge of bringing precisely the exhibition Freestyle online. This is incredibly paradoxical because it was an exhibition about the relationship between architecture and media. And we almost could not believe that this is what was happening, and this is what we had to work with. So this was the first project that we brought in. I mean, we did a few experiments at a personal level to meet with our families and so on just before this, but this was the first project that we brought online. Here you see we took some of the elements literally into that virtual space, then we extended parts of it. As you see, this sort of empty grid space around it that has the sort of transparency grid of Photoshop was basically a much more extended space that was showing the archival objects and much more information than what we could show in the gallery. But this was a sort of opening event that we had with curator Shumi Bose and Ollie Wainwright. And this it started to become incredibly interesting with us for us. We began to work on virtual on research and also practical design of virtual spaces that are browser based with some of our students. And here are some of interesting results. All of these projects are basically understanding that at this very moment, one needs to compromise in between, one needs to understand and prepare those spaces to be accessible from any device, and therefore they need to be very lightweight, computationally speaking. So that becomes a really interesting constraints in terms of materiality and construction of these spaces. Basically, what type of geometries do you use? What type of texturing do you use? But overall, I mean, what's at the core of it is really how are these spaces operated and what is virtual architecture doing in order to put all of us together. So this research has been compiled and is publicly available to anybody, and this distant crowds report. This is a report that our students at the Architectural Association worked on. We literally just gave them questions and we discussed it with them, but it was them who really put all of this together. It was done in 2020 and 2021. And it still remains incredibly relevant over a year after that. So, well, you can access that. And at the core, it deals with the question of like, how do we gather in these spaces and what does it mean for these spaces at a political level? Are they public? Are they civic? And basically, what are all the components that make that, if at all, would make that possible? And then another project that we would like to talk about in that regard of the variety of projects that we have done is this one that we see over here. It's called Punto de Inflexión, which is basically a festival space that we developed for an architecture foundation in Spain. It's like the Architects Institute of Spain. It's called Fundación Arquia. They give away grants, prizes, scholarships, and so on to especially to generations of young architects, people who's starting up their careers. And they generally meet like this. There is an event in a different city of Spain and or Portugal every year. And it is a very important event because it creates a sort of a bond across a generation of architects, right? So that year, the event was planned to take place in Barcelona, but it couldn't be because of the pandemic. So this is all that we were given. They asked us if we could something that was in some way reminiscent of the city. And of course, we took its city plan instead of taking its city image, although we took some elements of that as well, but that is perhaps more abstract. But what we took on, in a way, very literally, is the Barcelona city block. And that gave us the possibility of creating what is generally referred to as non-Euclidean architecture, which is basically creating a space that would be impossible if built physically. The reason why this is impossible is because this whole project is actually composed of only 9 of these squares that then get repeated, although you get the sense that you are walking through infinite space, and this is done just through the means of a portal that takes you back to the sort of origin point, or it takes you back to another point and then start over again. And 9 sort of ends up giving you enough variation that you don't notice that repetition. I mean, unless you spend hours and hours in the space. And another aspect that is that was quite interesting is that this festival was attended by people of all ages, and that meant also people that was accessing through all kinds of devices and with different degrees of familiarity with virtual space. Most people with zero familiarity. They were also accessing through different devices. Very few people through headset, but still some of them, and we wanted to make sure that it was available in that format, but most people accessing through their mobile phones or their computer screens. So the whole project is very much designed to from that sort of 2.5D point of view, where if you are someone who's not very familiar with navigating virtual space, you can, in most of the rooms, you can just walk forward and eventually find the material that is being exhibited, which, by the way, is all two-dimensional, because everything that was being exhibited was photographs of buildings, drawings, and films, right? So it was also like a complex one, and like, why do we have these three-dimensional spaces if we are showing two-dimensional content? And this is something that, we don't have that image here. Can I go up a couple of slides? That we can see in this image here at the bottom, where you can basically walk forward through these panels that are gonna fit your screen perfectly. They are screen format, and you are sort of seeing all that content full screen. However, if you encounter a friend and you wanna have a chat, you can step aside into these triangular gardens that you have on the sides, and hang out and explore the space, if you're more familiar with that way of circulating. So very much embracing this sort of in-between stage where we are sort of taking the video call, broadcasting it into a space for those who are comfortable, familiar, and want to get a sense of being together in there. They might want to chit chat at the same time as they are watching the lecture, which they can do because they are represented as avatars. They are not just like talking heads on a screen, on a video call where everyone can hear your sound. Here you have spatial sound, which is very, very important, because then you can be having a conversation and not be heard by someone on the other corner of the room. And this starts to create that condition of a crowd, of the possibility of being together with many others, but maybe being together more intensely with the people you have around you, and at the same time attending the same event with many people. And this is possible because we turn our cursors, no? We turn our computer mouse or our scrolling finger through the screen, or our name on a feed. We turn that into a virtual body. My virtual body is very different than my physical body. However, it allows some properties, the speciality of it. It allows me to come close to you or to go far away with you. And that creates a fundamentally different experience of virtual space, no? Or like that creates that possibility of actual togetherness and sense of a crowd. And as you see here, we have been experimenting a little bit with virtual bodies, and we have also been exploring many different platforms, some of which we do not really support, but we still spend time in them in order to see what's happening there. Here we see 3 different Fredriks in the 3 different platforms, one of which doesn't exist anymore, Sansar VR, and the other 2, which maybe we wouldn't want to, or definitely Meta, we wouldn't want to spend a lot of time in, but that's still worth understanding what they are and what they do. And this is something key where we wanted to talk about what it means to have a presence online, and how are we going to, or like, how do we make decisions on what kind of worlds do we want to create? Here you see underlined this quote from Jaron Lanier, that almost everyone who has a presence online has chosen to do so by a contract with a big corporation like Facebook, because that is sort of the place where you know you are going to encounter everybody, right? Or like, we seem to have a tendency to go into these platforms just because it's easy, because it's convenient, because you know where to find people. And at the moment, this is happening also for virtual reality platforms, or now so-called metaverse platforms. And we find that very problematic from the point of view that those are corporate entities, but it's going to be hard to avoid that people uses those. We generally use the Mozilla Hub's stack, not necessarily their platform, because with Mozilla Hubs, you can basically take their code, because it's open source, and host it yourself. And we think that that creates a much better model of the immersive internet, or the metaverse, if you like. But there is yet, I mean, we could solve that issue with this, trying to create the truly decentralized platform, which is like everyone hosts their own, like a website. But a bigger issue is going to be, how are these connected? And the real civic project is almost like, how are we going to go across them? At the moment, it's done in a rather clumsy way, where you have to that have menus popping up, and then you have the headset on and it's hard to click on things and it takes forever, and you have then like all the warnings coming up and so on. And there is more and more and more of these platforms popping up, but they are just fundamentally, they're not connected, right? You always need to go back to basically to some form of 2D browsing. We see some platforms trying to create their own maps, but sadly, this is mostly done just for the sake of artificial scarcity. So if I limit or if I create a map, then I can start creating centers that are going to be more valuable, and I can start selling you plots and so on, which is a replication of an existing model in a place where perhaps it doesn't make as much sense. And well, we have seen that in this sort of platforms, the communities are not as strong as they are in other places where they are not driven by artificial scarcity and property replicating real estate models. But there is some people that is starting to work towards this, like basically how can we bridge all of these worlds together? This is the Open Metaverse Interoperability group, very interesting to look into. They're like mainly engineers, basically trying to build protocols to move across. And here we see some examples of portals being in use in existing platforms, but only within the platforms themselves and not across them, right? So with the idea and with the conviction that we do have that by the middle of the 21st century, all media will be spatial, we realize that the portal will become the everyday means of transportation. And therefore we need to start to understand it and to start to work on it. No? What are going to be these doors into virtual worlds? How will they manifest? And how do we design them? What is a good portal? So we have been exploring different ways of creating these portals. Here you see this image that we created for the cover of Metropolis magazine. Here you see some other examples from previous projects. This is for in 2019, a project that we did in South Korea that was looking at the history of doors, of doorways. Or like also proposals such as portals opening up in the middle of the screen. We even came to the realization that our logo is in a sense also a portal. Interestingly, when we were creating it, we were inspired by shields, but by coat of arms, but then we didn't want to create that because those are basically shields and they're representing the opposite of what we were interested in. And here are some other projects that are dealing also with the going through spaces or like passing through thresholds virtually. But yeah, the project that I was just mentioning before, the Gate of Bright Lights in Seoul, South Korea, was a very significant one for us, as we were basically operating, or like that project was, we selected a site within the Doksegung Palace in South Korea that was literally a portal. It was a door where we had the opportunity to create an artwork for it that was basically creating now a virtual door place where the door would have originally been. And this project explored, like we started to look into the significance of doors in the past, where they were literally, if you could not get through the door, you could never have access to the content, not just the spaces, but also the content that was behind that door. So these doors became incredibly significant, and they often carried part of the story of what was contained behind it. However, today, even if buildings, for example, institutional buildings have big doors that might be closed, we still have the means to access that content or to access that world in some way. Virtually as well, right? So we believe that the door might become the metaphor or the object of great importance when we think about virtual transportation, and that led us to really look at this element that we have found so much of in science fiction, in fantasy, in popular media, but that is soon to become possibly the key architectural element to design in virtual space. That leads us to to our latest research project, the Portal Galleries, which is trying to basically create a history of the portal as an architectural element in popular media. We have created an archive, the Portal Archive, that has approximately over 900 entries. It took us a couple of years to build this. And this manifested in a diagram that is basically arranged according through time, that takes you through certain conclusions that we reached when looking at this archive. Here are some of the details. This is currently on show at the Sir John Soane Museum in London, still for a few more weeks. And maybe just to conclude very briefly, we were also making proposals of, after doing all this research, what we thought portals should be like, after looking at all these different types of portals in our research. And as we were saying in the beginning, the lecture sort of comes full circle. We have been working a lot with textiles, both as a means to create spatial qualities, but also as a means to create virtual space. And based on this work and based on our research on portals, we have sort of come to the conclusion that we think the best virtual portal would be a portal that is not a door, but a curtain, right? That is a piece of textile or a piece of fabric that you trigger or that you activate basically just by gesturing, opening up. In that, your picture plane becomes a piece of fabric with that view printed on, and you can open it and enter the space that is behind it. And in doing so, this fabric can also reveal further information, right? The textile itself being a network that could begin to show you connections to other spaces, but that could also show you through its texture or through embroideries within it, could show you further information about the space that you are going to enter. Together with this, we released yet another manifesto. We love doing that, even if it's basically putting yourself on the spot to write manifestos. But we think it's a very useful exercise to every now and then really try to put your thoughts out there and organized. So you can also access this online, our 8 propositions for a portal infrastructure for the virtual environment and how these portals should be. And with that, we conclude this very long lecture. I hope you're still there. And thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Yes, we definitely will. Thank you so much for inviting us. It was great to meet you and get a chance to talk about our work. And yeah, when we're in New York next time, we'll definitely drop by.
Yeah, and keep up with the student-run lecture series. We love to do this. They are our favorite kind of lectures. The ones that are arranged by students are always the most inspiring for us, with all the questions and all the involvement. So keep it up. Thanks so much for having us.
And if anyone wants to reach out, Instagram is usually the best. Just Spacepopular, just message. We'll be there.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.